So hello, my name is Spencer
Hi.
Hawkswell. I am the CEO at TheraPsil, patient rights advocate and lobbyist, and today I'm going to be sitting down with Janis Hughes here to talk about her experience through the Section 56 and SAP process trying to get access to psilocybin for medical purposes. Again, the point of this podcast and this video log is to explore the problem in Canada that many patients and healthcare practitioners are experiencing, trying to get compassionate access to psilocybin, something that was given to patients back in 2020, but has since been taken away and replaced with a whole swath of different regulations that just aren't working. But here to talk about it is Janis, who's caught in the middle of it. First and foremost, Janis, thank you for joining. I'd love if you could maybe introduce yourself.
Spencer, thank you for asking me. I am a 65-year-old, almost 66-year-old breast cancer patient. I have stage 4 breast cancer that was diagnosed about a year and a half ago. I went into major shock and rather severe anxiety about the stage 4 diagnosis. I was given Well, in January, I was given a prognosis of 2 years, which was, I think, just based on the average for stage 4 patients with breast cancer. But in any case, that launched my search for solutions, and I happened to watch the Fantastic Fungi movie, I think the end of that summer, which made me aware that psilocybin was a possible solution to my anxiety problems and my fear of dying. So that launched me on the search for psilocybin therapy, and I stumbled across your organization and launched an application to Health Canada for a Section 56 exemption through you.
And do you remember when you launched that application?
I think I sent my application to you a year ago, November.
Yeah, I think that checks out
Yeah.
about a year ago, just before the
Mm-hmm.
minister had come
Mm-hmm.
into office, or maybe just shortly after.
It didn't actually get submitted to Health Canada until January. I think it was received a week after they brought in the SAP approval process.
Yeah,
So I
and
missed a bit of a window where I think maybe they granted a few Section 56 exemption applications, but I seem to have missed the window for that.
they granted just before we got your exemption in. I think it was 7 or 8 exemptions because we were bringing them to court, and instead of going to court for the judicial review, they just granted the exemptions. But that's right. When the new SAP came in, they decided to stop granting Section 56s on the basis that they insist you try the SAP. Now, that's an interesting kind of paradox to be caught in because, the government says they're making a change to the SAP to improve your access and to help you get access. But how has that been working out for you?
Well, it didn't work out at all. I I saw the SAP process coming. I think I was alerted to the fact that it was going to be implemented shortly before it was, and so before I got my rejection letter from Health Canada advising me that I needed to exhaust these 2 other options, which were the SAP process and clinical trials, I'd already brought it up with my oncologist and the doctor that is in charge of my day-to-day treatment. The day-to-day doctor hadn't even heard of psilocybin, so just dismissed it out of hand. When I brought it up with my oncologist, she said she was aware of the use of psilocybin for the purpose of relieving end-of-life distress, but she herself had no interest in engaging in the SAP process. She said that there were other doctors in the Manitoba Cancer Care System who were familiar with that process. I think they requested on a regular basis for the patients who are their opioid addicted patients they've requested methadone and stuff like that. So she kind of referred me to these other doctors that are already familiar with the SAP process, but to no one in specific. And I thought, well, these doctors prescribing methadone, they're not going to know anything about psilocybin. That doesn't really get me anywhere. And then I approached my GP, and she also, well, she had actually, I guess it was a while before I approached her again, because back when I had originally applied for the Section 56 approval, she had signed off on the physician portion of the application, but she specifically said that her involvement ended there. She didn't really want to participate any further in the process. So it was only after I got my rejection letter and was told that I had to pursue this process that I contacted her, and she was reluctant to get involved as well. And then I learned after that she had even more reason than either of us realized, in that doctors who get approval to prescribe psilocybin through the SAP process are liable to get dinged by their insurance companies for extra liability costs. So that was something that neither of us were even aware of at the time, but I'm sure it would have been a further disincentive to her.
And it's become very, we've become very painfully aware of this now, the differences between the Section 56 exemption and the SAP. Mainly that the Section 56 is between you and Minister Duclos and or Minister Bennett, just deciding who, or depending on who's taking the file. In fact, I've actually just recently heard from Minister Caroline Bennett that, no, this is actually Minister Duclos that I should be reaching out to, and she declined a meeting with me just maybe 3 or 4 days ago. And that's a bit of a problem because, obviously, as you're saying, it's hard enough to get access to a doctor in Canada sometimes, let alone a doctor who's proficient and insured and medically competent in psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. Yet there are many therapists. And so that has been one of the bigger challenges of the SAP, is its focus on the doctor instead of the focus on the patient and the patient's rights and patient-centered care. Now, this has manifested itself in essentially patients such as yourself completely unable to access psilocybin through the SAP. And it's also encouraged us to continue down the route of Section 56. And maybe something that most people don't know is what the Section 56 is. And it really is just a piece of the Canadian Drugs and Controlled Substances Act that says that the minister may, for whatever reason the minister finds, exempt any person or class of persons from the provisions of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And that still exists. And so much of what Health Canada and other peoples in the government have done is said, you've got to do SAP or you've got to do clinical trials. And we've been trying that, clinical trials and SAP, but it hasn't worked. And so, part of the reason I think we've got to do this podcast, and perhaps the reason that you're involved in a court case, is because you are still looking for compassion from the minister. So can you tell me a bit about, what you've said to the minister, why you believe the minister should be able to grant you compassionate access?
Well, my perspective is, I know there's a lot of insistence that this drug has not been proven for this use, but I'm just not agreeing with that. I'm thinking the clinical trials on psilocybin have been running for literally thousands of years. We had an entire culture that was organized around the psilocybin mushroom, well, psychedelic mushrooms. It may not have been psilocybin, but in any case, and I think we know what the natural occurring poisons in our environment are, and psilocybin is not one of them. There is no known lethal dose, and it's not addictive. That's already been proven. So we already consume addictive drugs that have a lethal dose, a non-lethal dose. Some of them are regulated, some are not. And it's a whole other tangent. Personally, I think sugar is one of those unregulated poisons. But in any case, we know that alcohol has a much greater harm profile. It is regulated, but insofar as alcohol is regulated, why can't you just regulate psilocybin too? I'm not. I'm wary of regulation. I think it's easy to overregulate. I think in some respects cannabis has been overregulated, and I am fearful of the risk that psilocybin will also be overregulated in a way that favors big pharma and costly providers of psilocybin therapy. But I do acknowledge that psilocybin may be contraindicated for some people, a small subset of the population. But we already know to screen out for, we already know what conditions to screen out for. And so I don't think that psilocybin need actually to be prescribed by a medical doctor. I do think that the psilocybin is more useful when it's administered. Well, I do think that there are safety issues around set and setting. I mean, the set is the people, who are contraindicated because of existing mental illnesses of a certain kind. But as far as that, the only other safety issue for me is setting, and I was very conscious of that, and that is why I wanted a sitter, and I felt like the best benefit would come from an informed sitter who knew how to help me interpret the psilocybin experience, who knew how to prepare me for it and help me understand what help me process the experience at the end. And knowing that psilocybin is when you're on a middle or large dose of psilocybin, you're in a highly suggestible state. And so whoever is sitting with you, I think it needs to be a trusted person who's not going to abuse of your state of suggestibility. So where I would want to see regulation is an accountability is at the therapy end, but not so much at the drug supply end.
Absolutely.
There are issues. Yeah, obviously there are poisonous mushrooms out there and mushrooms that are not psychedelic mushrooms. And we in North America are not very well educated about mycology. We don't know how to identify these things for ourselves. And so, yes, maybe the supply needs to be regulated in terms of insofar as people get what they're seeking. Unadulterated form
and
of the.
And you make a good point. It's almost like there are, how many. Yeah, and you make an interesting point that I know we've discussed before, right? Health Canada insisting that they're worried about your safety, and this issue of safety keeps being brought up every time that you request, access to a substance that is certainly safer than alcohol. Especially when used with your healthcare practitioner and doctor. We've probably got 400 different mushrooms in Canada that'll kill you if you eat them. They're not regulated. You can take those. God forbid you take psilocybin the way that Thomas Hartle did. And I remember this great meeting we had with Health Canada, and they told you, we're worried about your safety, Janis. Do you want to tell me what you said back to them? Because I'll never forget it.
Oh, I can't remember my exact words, but I just found it extremely paternalistic. Here I am, a terminal patient. I have been given a finite I've basically been given a death sentence, a finite lifetime, and they are telling me that they're doing this for my safety, that I have to wait possibly beyond the time that I have so that they can ensure my safety, which I just find ridiculous. So maybe you remember better my exact words. But
No, that
I remember being just really, I just found it absurd. But they wouldn't get off this argument. It's like,
I that's exactly what I remember too, and that was for me one of the I will never forget that call in my life, because here we are sitting down, and you're right, you have the right to medical assistance in dying, and I think we had mentioned that you can access that in as little as 10 days in Canada, and that's a drug that will stop your heart. So if they're worried about safety, I think it's BS. And the purpose of the call in my mind and what I thought from Health Canada and certainly having you on it, it was to try and get compassionate access. And I really think that that's what we've got to go back to in Canada. It was the reason that Thomas and Mona and a couple of patients got their access back in 2020 under the leadership of Patty Haiju. And we did the same thing. We sat down in front of human beings and we said to them, as fellow Canadians, right, we live in Canada and share the same constitutional rights to life, liberty, and security of persons. This has given us medical cannabis. It has given us abortion. It has given us the right to die with medical assistance in dying, safe injection, all of these things that help us live a good life, a secure life, and a liberal life, a life where we have freedom to make our own medical decisions. And we're sitting down, and I'm watching you, a human being, talk to another human being, saying, why don't I have access to this mushroom if I have access to these other things? And they had no good reason other than safety. And it was an embarrassment, I think, for Health Canada. And it really was just sad for me that's where we find ourselves in a world in 2022 where there's so little compassion that we can't help someone who's trying to access mushrooms. In fact, we can't even treat them like we've treated, almost 100 other Canadians who were given the same thing. I'll never forget that call, ever. And I believe that this reasoning is the basis of your court case that you've got going.
well, sorry to interrupt, but
would you
yeah,
make any
no,
comments on that?
it's evolving. And as you know, I have already broken the law. I got tired of waiting for Health Canada to grant me permission. I had 3 people in my circle die on me They weren't doing it to me, obviously, but they died in the space of 2 weeks, which where my anxiety had been somewhat alleviated by having launched this whole process and knowing that there was this solution that had gone to some distance in alleviating my anxiety. I had this prospect of a psilocybin session that was going to help me accept the fact of my death and hopefully live the time remaining better. But the experience of having 3 people close to me die in quick succession caused my anxiety to rise again. That dread, that weight on my chest that I had been waking up with every morning after my diagnosis, it came back. And so I just decided that's it. A therapist, because of national exposure through a CBC report, a therapist had revealed themselves to me. And so I contacted that person and I started the process of orientation and eventually had 2 psilocybin sessions, a couple of months apart, a medium dose and a full dose, which completely relieved my anxiety. I now almost look forward to death. like, it's extraordinary. I found the words one day to explain what I was feeling after that full dose session. I had a sense of fullness right up to here that was exactly the opposite of the hollowness that you feel when you feel fear. That fullness, that sense of fullness was so strong for weeks afterwards. And I feel it still. It's somewhat attenuated, but I feel it still. I am no longer afraid of dying, but I am not eager to die. I still feel, in fact, I am feeling more stimulated than I have. I mean, just the discovery of the whole psychedelic thing just stimulated me on an intellectual level, and I've just been consuming all kinds of books about, I mean, it's just launched me on a bunch of different directions, exploring Eastern religion and mythology, Joseph Campbell, his writings, and scientific and other writings on psychedelics, and I'm just consuming all of this stuff, and I'm super intellectually stimulated, and it's just helped stimulate my desire to continue living, which already existed, but I just feel like I have even more reasons. And part of what is stimulating me is this advocacy work. Having discovered how beneficial this is, I just feel it's like a mission. Yes, I have solved my problem myself without Health Canada's help, but I know I have many friends who could benefit from this, who are either fearful of breaking their law or they can't afford it, who would benefit from an insured regime, that kind of thing. There's so much distance to go. Legalization, insurance, a lot of work to be done, but I want to contribute however I can. And so as far as my argument about life, liberty, and security of the person, I have the sense, I have the intuition that the relief of the anxiety is going towards the stabilization or the regression of the disease. My scans have, since I went on oral chemotherapy, have been consistently showing shrinkage of my tumors, but I have the sense, since my full dose experience, that may have accelerated. And I don't know if that's a fact. We'll find out with the next set of scans. But I just feel that this medicine has possibly extended my life. So weighed against Health Canada's offer of die in 2 weeks or less, or live even longer than my initial prognosis, which am I going to choose? Why, Health Canada, aren't you granting me the opportunity to exceed my limited prognosis? Perhaps even go into full remission and live another 20 years. I mean, I'm flabbergasted that Health Canada would sooner I take the poison pill than take the good medicine.
And this is the minister. Janis, one thing I've been trying to make clear on this podcast is, when we speak about Section 56 and these requests, we are talking to the minister. Mm-hmm. And the minister tries to hide behind Health Canada, but we can't let that happen because Health Canada is a bureaucracy. There is no single beating heart. They are not an elected official. But Minister Jean-Yves Duclos and Minister Caroline Bennett are elected health ministers and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. And I really think there's value in focusing on them because they're the ones who can help you. The Section 56 says the minister, not Health Canada, this heartless, nameless bureaucracy, but the Minister of Health. And your argument rings so true, right? It was Patty Hajdu who was the human being, the wonderful, courageous, and compassionate minister who granted Thomas his exemption, right? Bruce his exemption. And And I really believe that that argument that you talk about there, you know, the ability to take a substance that you know works, that you believe has extended your life, and I'm sure your doctor and therapist would agree it has improved the quality of your life. For our new ministers to ignore you is wrong. I think it's morally unconscionable. And I think that's what we want to try and do here is expose this so that the ministers will step up, and I believe they'll do the right thing, but they've got to hear us.
Yes, but I still want to push for the broader rethinking of the classification of these drugs, and it's not just psilocybin, it's MDMA and LSD. I mean, these drugs have been unfairly characterized as things that they're not. And it's just, well, I'm just learning more about the politics behind the current, how these drugs became outlawed, and it's appalling. There's no real rational justification for it all. It was all pure politics back in the 70s. It was out of Richard Nixon's desire to suppress anti-war demonstrators and black activists. He targeted their communities by outlawing these drugs that he knew they consumed. And yeah, it's just, it's very sad that for decades people have been denied the medicinal value of these drugs. But here we are. The government of Canada is in a position to change things. I've already taken responsibility for my health into my own hands. I mean, I honestly don't care for me personally whether the minister grants me exemption or not. Me personally, I know how to access this drug, and I am going to continue to access it to the extent that I feel that I need it. Go ahead, come and arrest me. You know, like, but I would hope that the minister has the compassion to grant other people in my position what he did not grant me. I am very passionate about other people in my situation, and I know there are many of my personal knowledge, all of these people that have applied to you for TheraPsil support, and all of the people that don't even know that this is an option. I want to advocate for them. Fair enough?
It's amazingly said. And hey, was it Benjamin Franklin, I want to say, that said that, you know, as a citizen, it's not only your right, but your obligation to stand up against laws that you despise, something like that. And I believe it's true. You know, we see these stores in Vancouver and Toronto selling mushrooms on the street, and the police are not stopping this. You know, we see online sales. Apparently you can buy them just about anywhere in Canada and have them shipped to your address, and there's no crackdown on this. And so I see this danger in having laws that protect and serve no one, and in fact do the opposite. They limit your the safety, your ability to access them in a timely and safe manner, because it means that, you know, you can't really work with above ground doctors and therapists, and you know, not everyone is as courageous as you're saying, right? Some people just may never end up accessing it. Because I think we know the truth, that no one's going to be busting down your door to arrest you for something, especially when they're selling it on the streets in Vancouver. And that's just sad that this is, you know, the political environment we find ourselves in. And it's something I don't say lightly, but it seems to be a lack of courage. And I think courage and compassion are needed more than ever, more than ever, given the state of things in Canada. Both our healthcare system and the last 2 years, where people have, you know, been under a lot of stress, and I'm sure that it had a special effect on people who were dealing with cancer.
So you think lack of courage on the part of the government?
On on the part of ministers, and I really,
So what
since
is
day
the
one,
fear? Sorry, what do you perceive as the fear? Is it fear of political backlash, that there are enough people opposed to this that you can't
for
go
sure.
along?
I think that I see the government as intentionally moving slow, and I both respect this and despise it at the same time, because stability is necessary in government. And I'm sure that there are probably 6 other people podcasting right now like we are about their issues, right? Their policy changes that they would like. And to be able to just go through and do all of those is a lot. So I see it as twofold. There's the bureaucrats at Health Canada who do not want a pile of work, do not want to stick their necks out too far, and may also just be completely disempowered to stand up and say, give Janis her exemption. I believe that that's one part, but the other part is certainly, a minister who is probably very busy, and needs to see this as a political win and something that is going to further, the party, the Liberal Party, if it's the minister, and their own career, and maybe also just be the right thing, right? Maybe they have an anti-drug stance. It's poor education for whatever reason. I think attention needs to be drawn, because if we're debating whether or not, this is the will of the Canadian people, we've done the polls. We're going to be launching one in November, and it's showing that, 80% of Canadians support you, Janis, and they agree that psilocybin should be available for you. And 80% of Canadians do not agree on anything. So this is a landslide, right? What is it like? It only takes 30 or 40% of Canadians to even vote for a leader of the country, let alone 80% agreeing on this. So I think, it's why we want to do this, communicate that this will take courage. It will take attention, education, and that it's the will of the Canadian people. It's a charter-based right. So I do want to bring up quickly the court case that you're involved in, because it's something that we'll be chatting a lot on this podcast about. We'll have the different lawyers and patient plaintiffs speaking. In Canada, again, we've got medical assistance in dying. That is a right. We have the right to safe injection. We have the right to make our own medical decisions with abortion and with cannabis. It doesn't make sense to me why we would have a constitutional challenging debating whether or not we might have access to psilocybin mushrooms at all. What made you want to get involved in the court case, and what do you think the outcome will be?
Well, I think everybody in North America acknowledges that legalization of psychedelics is coming. I think it's just a question of how much regulation there is going to be, and
It's a good point.
I think why I'm involved in the court case is I want to see this resolved quickly. I don't want people like me to be languishing. In fact, a doctor of my acquaintance, who's a palliative oncologist, had a patient who was requesting exactly this this medication, who died before this oncologist could even apply for the SAP on his behalf. People are dying in distress where they don't need to be. So I want the government to move a lot faster than it is. And if in the interim it has to move by granting these exemptions, so be it. But ultimately we need to get these psychedelic drugs off the schedule that they're currently in, acknowledge that they do have medicinal value, and create a framework for providing people with psilocybin assisted therapy that is going to be safe for them.
Well, sure.
Why I'm
And this,
involved in the court case, well, initially I got involved because I wanted this for me. Now I no longer need it for me exactly, except to legitimize my current actions. But I want it for all of those people I know just won't break the law, and who, because of this cloud of illegality, don't totally trust the medicine. I think we're going to have to lift that cloud. It's going to have to be unambiguous. Yes, this works, and it is legitimized by the government. The government acknowledged it works, and here's the framework for you to access this. I mean, this is going to be necessary for the people who stand to benefit actually getting access to it, availing themselves of it. And oh my God, I just believe that this has so much potential to alleviate so many problems. I am concerned that it's going to be over commercialized. I like the arguments that we've made in the court case, where we talk about the issue of financial accessibility. And I don't want to see only the synthetic form of psilocybin legalized. I think there should be room for, I would much rather that it be the natural form of the drug that people avail themselves of. I'm inclined to believe what Paul Stamets has come out and said, that he believes that there is an entourage effect of other chemicals in the natural mushroom, and that we just don't know. I mean, so much more research would be required for us to know what are the benefits of the natural substance over the synthetic form. But the problem for me with the synthetic form is that it gets patented and controlled and very expensive. And I think I saw a quote. I think one of our co-plaintiffs was quoted $4,800 for psilocybin, a single treatment of psilocybin that she couldn't afford. I have friends who want this who couldn't afford that. My costs were far less than that.
and I think that's an important thing to distinguish with what our case does versus, some people are saying, oh, it's going to become legalized soon through drug products. Why is your case necessary? And I think that's something that we haven't communicated very well, perhaps through TheraPsil, is the difference between a drug becoming approved, such as, a pharmaceutical company bringing psilocybin to market, is we might see prices like $30,000 for the treatment because it's their drug. It's their drug product, right? That's why patents are nice and people enjoy them. What we're fighting for is not just for a drug to become available, because that doesn't really translate into accessible. What we're looking to do is make this medically available like cannabis is, where you can grow your own, right? Or you can have someone else grow it for you, or you can buy from a mushroom cultivator, or if you want, you can get a synthetic psilocybin. We also want healthcare practitioners to be able to train with it. We want it accessible not just for the indication that the drug might have been approved for, such as distress or end-of-life distress, but also make it available to people who are using it for cluster headaches or chronic pain, because we can't move at the speed of research and enforce this senseless law on people and punish them for helping themselves. I think that's, again, against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So explaining what this Charter Challenge does is important, because it totally changes the game. And the fact that people like you and Thomas or Bruce are in this case is what is going to allow for the regulations to come out and actually help people such as yourselves, give you what you're asking for. So you're right, and it is maybe more important than just waiting for it to become legalized. And it's actually about what are the regulations going to be. And a great example of that, I don't know if you saw this, Janis, but Alberta just regulated psilocybin along with a couple of other substances such as ketamine. And I'll just say that my opinion on it is they way overregulated. They're treating psilocybin the same way they treat ketamine. And that's wrong. That's inconsistent with the research. That's inconsistent with, the use of psilocybin with over 100 Canadians, patients and healthcare practitioners. They don't allow it to be used outside of the clinic unless the person is in severe palliative condition. And only a psychiatrist can write a prescription. And you need a license. So, the wait time for a psychiatrist is 6 to 8 months in Alberta. Would you wait that long just to see a psychiatrist, or would you just go out there and get the psilocybin? And I think people are just going to be going out there and getting psilocybin. And so those regulations are a failure, and psilocybin's not even regulated yet. So it is a shame, and I salute you and what you're doing to make sure that the regulations are fair and actually help people instead of, just some political move.
Yeah, I feel like I want to help shape whatever regulations are coming down the pipe, and yeah, I don't want to see over-regulation. I think I'm no expert, but I understand that for a lot of people, small suppliers in particular, the cannabis legislation is overly restrictive and
Absolutely.
possibly in other respects as well. I don't know. But it's something I'm afraid of. I mean, we are consuming all kinds of chemicals that haven't even been properly researched, that we suspect are poisonous or we know are poisonous. I find it absolutely ridiculous. But what does it come down to except pressure by high-powered lobbyists in various industries? I think, unfortunately, it's economic interests that control what we consume and what we don't consume.
I'm certainly afraid of that. That would be unfortunate if it was economic interests and the interests of a small minority. The final thing, just before we wrap up here, that I'll mention is, on the SAP requests that we've just received back this week, Janis, and this is maybe will be interesting news to you. They're actually requesting that for people with treatment-resistant depression, that before they are able to use the SAP, they must first try ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, otherwise known as shock therapy.
Oh my God.
I know.
Kidding me?
So we are hopefully having a story put together by a national newspaper to expose this, because this is at the peril of the doctors who are saying, who are you? Who in Health Canada is making this assertion that we need to try this? And they're saying, well, we're the regulators, we follow the guidelines. And our doctors are saying, well, we're doctors, we're human beings, we do what's right? We have compassion in our hearts. So I'm not even sure that the SAP would have worked if we were able to get a doctor to do one for you. And so that's what we're contending with. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that before we wrap up here in a minute.
Well, that phrase that they used, what is it again? That you have to have exhausted all these standard treatments for depression. Well, I wouldn't have fit that bill even without the electroconvulsive therapy, because I haven't endured years of therapy or years of treatment with drugs. I experienced antidepressants when I was a teenager. I made what I consider a not truly genuine suicide attempt. It was really a call for attention when I was 16 years old. It could have been, well, in any case, I had to go to the hospital, have my stomach pumped. My parents' reaction was to send me to a psychiatrist who prescribed antidepressants. I quickly found that these antidepressants not only eliminated the lows, but they eliminated the highs as well. I did not want to live life without joy. And so I very quickly said, this is not for me. And I have never again sought the use of antidepressants. And in fact, I lived with low-grade depression that occasionally veered into severe depression until my mid-40s, when I was diagnosed what I believe was a lifelong hypothyroidism condition. Looking back, I had all of the symptoms at the age of 16 when I made that not so genuine suicide attempt. And I think I think increasingly, at the time that I was diagnosed, they weren't checking young people for hypothyroidism, but I think it's epidemic in our society. It is, and I'm been doing tons of reading about metabolic disorders, and I'm increasingly coming to believe that depression is a metabolic, has links to metabolism and dysfunctional metabolism. And there's an entire book about that, an MD called Harvard MD by the name of Chris Palmer has just come out with a book called Brain Energy, where he states this hypothesis with supporting evidence that mental illness, all mental illness is metabolic in origin, which I find just astonishing. But just as part of my, initially as a weight loss attempt, I started eliminating sugar from my diet, and then I got the cancer diagnosis, and I had even more reason to eliminate sugar from my diet. And I have found a very obvious link between sugar consumption and depression. If I eat enough of very sweet dessert, my mood plummets very soon afterwards. There's a clear link for me between sugar and mood, and this is, I think there are.
I think in many years,
Hmm?
I think in many years we'll look back and probably laugh at how foolish our society was to make sugar so available, to put it in everything kids eat. I think we'll really look back and see the dangers of sugar.
Well, you know, the
dangers
were identified back in the 20s. Read Robert Lustig's book on addiction. I forget offhand the hacking of the American mind. Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist who I've learned everything I know about sugar from. But oh shoot, what was I gonna say?
Just that we were just talking about.
I forget where I was going.
Well, I think the truth is that we already know that sugar is bad for you, and we already know
the point I was going to make was the tobacco industry learned everything it knew. It learned all of its tactics from the sugar industry. The sugar industry implemented all of these disinformation tactics and taught the tobacco industry. It's all about, industry funding of scientific research and dismissing of contrary research and heavy promotion. I think there are ads about how good sugar is for you that were published in the 20s and 30s. But I find that very revealing because it was known back in the 20s that sugar was a poison. So here we are. We have the Canada's Food Guide. What does it say about sugar? I mean, whatever limits it may prescribe for sugar are not what the American Heart Association will prescribe, which is quite limited. Yeah. Because they acknowledge the link between sugar consumption and heart disease. Anyhow, I got off on another one like that.
No, it's all good. Janis, this has been a great interview, and I'm sorry to say I've got to jump now. But I'm just very, very happy that we were able to meet and that we got a Section 56 out for you, that we tried SAP, and more importantly, that you are where you are right now, that you were able to experience things. And I think it's horrible that, other people might not find themselves in the same situation where they're able to access psilocybin. So that Joseph Campbell book, or Joseph Campbell, you're talking about this hero with 1,000 faces, the hero's journey. I see you acting that out. I see you acting out the hero myth, and I want to thank you on behalf of myself, the TheraPsil community, and probably if it's not too presumptuous, every Canadian who might ever get access to psilocybin, because you're doing a real service here.
Well, I thank you for helping to get me, for helping give me this role, providing me with the support.
It's been a pleasure. Wonderful. Well, this wraps up our podcast, and thank you.
Pleasure to speak to you always.
Take care, Janis.
Take care. Bye.
I'm just going to